Hello. Today we are going to talk about transformational tools, and that means we're going to talk a little bit again about rotate and using push, pop, and map. And if we get through that, we might talk about noise, but I also might save it for the next tutorial. Let's just go over rotate again. Okay, so we made the color mode HSB, window inner width, window inner height, and chose a background color. So now I just want to make a square. Put it in the middle, width divided by 2, height divided by 2, 100. Rect mode center. Gonna make it a little bit bigger, 500. And no stroke. Fill will stay white, so 0, 0, 100. And so I just want to rotate it, which is a little bit of the same thing that we've done before. So we'll just put rotate, the rotate function. And the rotate takes values that are in measurements of an angle, because it's measuring like the angle of a circle. So you could use pi if you want it to rotate, you know, in a full circle. You could put just pi. There's pi divided by 2, and you can learn more about that if you go and check out the rotate function in the reference, but what we'll use is radians. So we can't just put like r, like a variable of r, which would start at 0, and we're gonna create a variable up top, let r equal 0. So this is essentially 0 right now. But we have to, you know, as we move it, r plus equals 1, which we've done before, it'll go up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And since rotate needs the parameter in here to be an angle, we'll just translate r, like create r as a radians. So you put radians, and inside of the radians, parentheses, you'll put r. So like any number that r is, it will now turn into radians, which is a unit of measure for an angle. Cool, so we'll press that and it won't rotate because we need to animate it. So r plus equals 1. And if we can recall from previous videos, we need to translate the point of rotation. So above rotate and square, you put translate to basically whatever is in your square here, probably. So translate to width divided by 2 and height divided by 2. And we can come in and change the location that the square is being drawn to 0, 0. And so now we've got our rotating square, which we've done before. Should be easy enough. But the new thing is, if we want to do a second square and we want to make it smaller, I'm doing 0, 0, 300 to kind of copy the square up here. And we're gonna fill with black. So 0, 0, 0. If you just change that brightness to 0 or 100, that's the difference here between white and black. Okay, so it's doing basically like the translate and the rotate are affecting this square. And so it is rotating, but if we want it to rotate at like a different rate, then we have to, well, let's see, rotate radians, and then we could test this out by putting R2. So one will be rotate 1 and rotate 2. Change that one to R1. Come up to our global variable list and say let R 0, but R2 will move slower. .1. Cool, well that worked well enough. I want to place it over at -100 on the x-axis. Cool, so we can move it around and make it rotate backwards and make it rotate slower. Which is kind of looking fun. But say now we want something that doesn't rotate, so we could put another square. So I'm just gonna copy and paste this black square with the fill, and I'm gonna actually make it white. And I'm going to make it smaller, so it's in the same location. It should be somewhere in the middle of this square. So we'll make it smaller at 50. Oop. Okay, and it's rotating at the same time as the second square is here. And we can like see that better if we maybe speed it up. Yeah, it's rotating with the black square. But I don't want it to rotate at all. So in that case, we have to use the push pop function. So I want it to be like underneath my square, but I don't want it to rotate. You'll just use push and pop as a container. So if you just contain each element with push and pop, and now you have to go and translate for each one of them as well. Oh, this one's not being and we'll change this to a different color so we can see where it's at. Cool. So now we can see a little bit better of what I was trying to go for. So I want the first square to rotate to the right, second square to rotate to the left, and the third square to stay still. And then, so they're all having different commands. So if I take away the push pop, then what'll happen? Yeah, everything just goes a little bit haywire. Say I take out that translate, the too many translates. You can see that it's almost correct, but the inside square is still going to be rotating. But now that we put the push pop around every individual element, then we get to the place that we want to be. Ta-da! Cool. So that's just, whenever you're working with rotate, just keep the practice of putting a push pop container around the translate and rotate functions, especially if you don't want them to affect everything, all of the code underneath. And so there you have that. And now let's talk a bit about the map function. It maps one set of values, like the mouse X value. It maps that set of values to another set of values, like let's say color values. So we can, if at any time we're like, I want to make an interaction and I want my interaction to change, you know, the color, the rotation, or anything. I want it to change the size of something. Well, you think about the interaction. In our case, the mouse will do mouse X, the set of values that that interaction is causing, and what it's going to change. So like we're about to change the hue. So if we think about the values of mouse X are equal to 0 to width, and then the values of our hue are going to be equal to 0, 360. So when you're writing out the map function, you do 5 parameters. So you do map, open close parentheses, and within that function, the first value is going to be the thing that you're tracking. So in our case, mouse X is the thing that we're tracking. And then the second value is going to be the minimum of that first, the current range, the minimum current range, max current range, and then the last two values are going to be minimum new range, max new range. So in the case of mapping the mouse X to our hue, it would look something like, so I'm just going to leave this comment up here to remind us what the parameters are within that map function, since there's like 5, so it's kind of a lot to remember. So down here in the draw function at the top. I'm gonna put map, so mouse X, and the minimum range of mouse X is 0, the maximum is width. The minimum of our hue is 0 and the maximum is 360. The thing that we want it to map to is the color. So we'll put color equals map and then the parameters. So up at the top, we'll make color a global variable. And we'll declare color as being map. And then wherever we want to put color, or whatever we want to so I've got this white square here. So I'm just going to, instead of making it white, I'm going to fill it with COL for color. Or I guess in our class we normally do C for color, so I'll just change that back to C. And then in the fill for that big white rectangle, we put C, 100, 100. And so, so it is changing color based on the location of our mouse right now. And if you see, it'll go from red to red because it's going from 0, which is at the top of the color wheel, red. And then if you go all the way around the color wheel and come back to 360, it's going to be red. So it goes through all of the rainbow colors. We could also map the saturation and the brightness as well. So we could do saturation. So saturation and copy that map. And we could do, if I go up and down, I want the saturation to change. So mouse Y, 0 to height. And saturation's min value is 0. Saturation's max value is 100. And then I just have to create that variable, let saturation, sat equals the mapping, remapping, and then in fill, I'll just put sat. So if I want the saturation to be max, my mouse will be down here. If I want it to be medium saturated, and then the color is still changing on the x-axis, the saturation, if I just go up and down, white to fully saturated, white to fully saturated. And maybe I want to change my minimum value, so I don't want it to be, I don't want it to ever be white. So I'm changing that minimum value to 50, so that if I'm at the bottom, it's fully saturated, but if I'm at the top, then it's, half saturated. And so you've got like a little bit of control there, and then you can change the color and saturation depending on the mouse X and mouse Y. And we could also change the R. So maybe let's change, we can map everything. So let's just go ahead and do that for the fun of it. So R1 and R2 are going to be also mapped. At R1 will be at mouse X. Oh, oops. Minimum, minimum 0 to width. And then for the rotation, so down here we are changing it to radians. So this does have to be a number. So you can just experiment a little bit with that and see like how much you actually want to rotate your object. Like if we put 360, 0 to 360, that's pretty good. It rotates it all the way. And now we can do the same thing for R2. So I hope you can see the usefulness of the map function when it comes to interaction. And then whenever we go and start to use some like data that we're getting from sensors with Arduino in the next, I don't know, I think that's like after spring break. You could use the map function to like take those the sensor data and then map it to something in P5. So like for instance, like if I use an ultrasonic sensor, which I'll tell you about later, it can tell the distance that I am from the sensor. So you could like map the person's distance from the center to the color of your object, right? So it's just gonna be like really, really useful for that. And of course, I can go over it again later. So we're gonna change R2 to mouse Y. Oh. And height. Always am weird with the caps. Cool, so now I'm just gonna try to stay on the y-axis, which is very hard to do. And I'm changing the saturation here, and I'm changing the rotation of the black square. And then on the x-axis, I'm changing the color, and I'm changing the rotation of the color square. And if I just go crazy, woo, 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 maximum user control. So that is the tutorial that I have for y'all today. And I hope you find it very useful and very fun, and you can make whatever you want to with it. So happy coding.